Hi there. So we're on the Dreamcatcher chapter 16, and remember they're in the cage now. So Moll wondered about mumbling an apology. Then she remembered how much she hated Alfie and looked down at the clearing. Gobbler stalked towards the fire to collect the sausages, and he stole back into Skull's wagon. Alfie took the roll of leather from his pocket. Now, the light's up. We need to read this fast. Again, Moll saw her initials burned into the outside of the leather, but what unnerved her most was the wording below, "From the maiden." Again, she turned cold inside. Why were her pa's bone reading and the leather roll so bent on sending her into the hands of someone who might well be a bone-grinding lunatic? She glanced at the seal on the leather. It was black, like the imprint of the night. Moll steeled herself. She wouldn't allow fear to snatch back her plan of finding the ambulance avenging her parents. She turned to Alfie, her eyes narrowed. Where'd you find this, anyway? Tucked inside one of the oaks I was hiding behind when Gobbler and me came for you at the camp. Didn't think much of it until I saw the bones inside your talisman. Alfie unrolled the leather while Moll scowled beside him. The inside was covered with black words, and each one had been burned into the leather. Moll tensed. This was something that belonged to her, and Alfie had no right to it. She swiped for it, but Alfie held it close. Read it to me. Moll glared at him, then she looked down at the burnt lettering. She was silent for a few seconds, and then, very quietly, she said, "You can tell a lot about a person from their handwriting." "Load of squiddles to me," Alfie muttered. Moll shook her head. Mushi says writing's like a clue to what a person's like. Big bends in the G, F, J, and Q mean a person's greedy. Small loops in the A, D, E, and O mean a person's tight-fisted. She was fighting for time, trying her best to read the words in her head while blabbing away to Alfie. Alfie shoved her in the back. "Get on and read it, will you?" Moll arched her eyebrows just a little. Those wispy dashes across the T and F mean there's a person's clever thinking. "Look, we've got to read this and get out of here. We don't have time." Moll's mind was racing. Suppose this was a message only she was meant to see. But she needed Alfie. He was her only way out, and now she had to trust him. She took a deep breath. "It's a poem," she said slowly. She started to read. "Many and many a footstep from you in a hovel among the gorse. A wild maiden lives who must eschew by marshland and heather grown a course. This maiden she waits for the child to appear, to meet on a hill turned black. For darkness is spreading, stirring so near, and the murmur is starting to crack. Follow the path past the bog myrtle ponds where the nests of the warblers lie, and further on past dewy bracken fronds, see the shivering nightjars cry." Moll scanned the words again. The dew, the hill, the maiden. It was all there, just as her pa's bone reading had said. And this maiden, whoever she was calling for the child to appear. It had to be her. Alfie looked at Moll wide-eyed. "This maiden's living out in a hovel on the heath among the heather and the gorse, and that child is you. She's waiting for you, isn't she? She left a poem that links with your bone reading. So as you find it and seek her out." Moll's face paled. She had to tell Alfie. Hard Times Bob, one of the elders in our camp, used to tell us stories about a maiden out on the heath who gnawed on children's bones. "And you believed him?" Moll was silent for a second, then she waved her hand airily. "Course not," she scoffed. "I kept telling my pal Siddy that there was no such person." But shivers were crawling down Moll's back now. The poem and the bone reading were telling her to walk straight into the hands of the maiden she'd grown up fearing. Moll thought of Siddy and wished he was with her. He'd have said something to chase away the fears. She thought of him struggling against his ropes by the river. Surely the camp would have found him by now. Alfie looked back at the roll of leather. "You think this maiden knows where the amulets are hidden?" he asked. Moll tried to pull herself together. "Perhaps," she paused. "I've never been out to the heath. How far is it?" "South from here for about 2 miles. It's just past the edge of the deep wood." Moll squinted at the poem, then she blinked several times. She peered closer. She could have sworn that some of the letters looked different somehow, just for a second, as if there was another message hidden inside the poem. She frowned at the leather, but the poem stared blankly back, every letter just the same as before. Alfie hadn't noticed, and he turned to Moll. Who in their right mind would live in a hovel out on the heath? A bone-chewing psychopath, that's who, Moll thought, but she said nothing. Alfie shrugged. "I suppose it doesn't really matter who this maiden is. We've just got to trust the poem and follow it." Moll was silent for a second. "What if it's a trap?" "But there are the bones I found in your talisman. Dew Hill Maiden. Who read them? Because it's all there in your poem." Moll shifted her weight. "My pa, he was the guardian of the oracle bones." Her jaw stiffened. "Along with my ma. Before your skull killed them." Alfie gave a whistle. You're in this thick and fast then, aren't you? Moll nodded grimly. A crow landed on top of the cage, and Moll was almost glad of its company. Then it ruffled its feathers and took off into the pale sky. Moll's gaze fell on the feeble embers of the fire in the middle of the clearing. It was so different from the roaring flames in Oak's camp. She glanced at the grey trees craning over Skull's black wagon, and thought of Griff breaking through the vapours to find her, only to be torn away. Was he safe? Would he even try coming back for her now? He knew what lay in wait in the deep wood. Alfie looked at Moll. I don't believe in the bone murmur for years. Thought it was a load of rubbish. He paused. Then I saw your wild cat. Moll's stomach flipped. Something about the way he looked when he burst from the bank, like he'd do anything to keep you safe. That's not normal. That's Wildcat. Maybe he'll help us find the amulets, then we'll be rich and free. Moll could feel tears stinging in the corner of her eyes. What's it like knowing a wild animal, one who hasn't been tamed by humans before? Moll swallowed. He's the closest thing I've got to a family, aside from Oak and Mooshie. Alfie looked away. I wouldn't know. I haven't got family. He worked his knife over the ropes that bound Moll's wrists, and they fell away. Then he knelt down before the padlock, and as the cage creaked and swayed, he looked up at Moll. Lucky for us, I know a way out to get out of this. Moll shoved the leather roll into the pocket of her dress and crouched before the lock. Then she jumped back from the bars. Dark shapes were crossing the clearing towards the cage. Could it be Oak and the others? Had they beaten their way past the hounds and come back after her? But as they grew closer, Moll realised the shadows weren't Oak and her friends. They weren't even people. Far below Moll and Alfie, eyes burned into the early morning light, wolfish and untamed, and jagged teeth shone, stained with blood. There were 4 of them, and their muscles bulged out of their black coats, as if they could barely contain their own strength. Chains still hung from their collars. Even Skull's boys hadn't dared untie them, and they circled the cage, growling. Brunt appeared through the watery sunlight, seizing the hounds by their chains, and Moll rebound her wrists. He wrenched the catch on the rope that held the cage, and it crashed down into the clearing. Moll was smashed against the side, her spine grating on the metal. Brunt thumped 2 bowls of lukewarm porridge against the bars. Then the hounds stalked up close, their teeth like rows of broken glass. And Moll and Alfie cowered in the middle of the cage, their eyes glazed with fear. And that's the end of your chapter.